Hey y'all, happy Wine Wednesday. I've changed it up. I'm sipping on Pinot Noir. Holly, what are you sipping on?
I've got a snuggler. It's peppermint schnapps with hot chocolate
Nice.
because it's stormy and cold and yucky
My
here.
usual.
Yeah, it is. Your usual water. Okay, Ray's got his water.
I
Okay,
got that
Ice
too.
water, not just water.
so I, so guys, if there was a
I
false
can't
start, I
drink
really
water without ice.
gotcha. So guys, if there was a false start where it looked like we were going live and then we weren't, I apologize. I'll delete that. They've changed the whole way that Restream works, so I'm trying to figure it out. Apologies. I see Shyla here already. Happy Wine Wednesday. I still need to know, did you get your shirt, Shyla? Because I did send it, so I need to know. But for tonight, it's open chat. So anybody who does jump in, we're here for chatting about seahorses and anything seahorse related, water related, saltwater related. And we're here for any questions, but we do have a few things we'd like to discuss. But before we dive in, Holly, did you have anything new this week that you wanted to report?
Not really. Yeah, today was water change day for me, and we had a big storm come in. So we've got 8 to 10 days of rain expected and snow just above us. And up where I took you driving, like when we went to the lake, and we took that dirt road, remember? Okay, so up there is where we get our Christmas tree. So I'm like, oh man, it's gonna snow, and we won't, once it starts snowing here, it doesn't stop. And so I'm like, well, we want to try and beat the storm and go get our Christmas tree. So we left real early this morning at the time I usually clean the Seahorse tanks.
Mm-hmm.
And we got not more than a mile outside of the last town, Sterling City, and it just started snowing so hard, and the
Oh,
road got slick, and the Forerunner wouldn't go into four-wheel drive, so we had to turn around and come back.
ugh.
So then I got the Seahorse tanks done, and I had like a couple appointments this afternoon for work, but other than that, it was a pretty chill day because I didn't jam the Christmas tree into it. So,
Right. Good. But it's come. The Christmas tree will come. I'm sure you're gonna have your
yeah, we'll get a break. Maybe I guess in a week or so. I'm just hoping that it kind of rains up there in between. So, because it's not county maintained up there, you're on your own. That. So if they get a lot of snow, it'll just stay there all winter. So
It's
crossing fingers.
right. It's supposed to snow here tomorrow, and I'm just like, what? I mean, it's so nice
You're,
out. Oh God.
I'm not ready yet. I know.
Meanwhile, up here in Canada, in London, Ontario, where everybody thinks of us living in igloos and everything, I haven't had any snow yet.
See? Well, good. Ray, did you have anything to report today before we dive into the topics?
Not really. Just getting by, trying to keep my dogs happy and keep myself happy, and a little ticked off. The brain isn't working too well at the moment, so that's frustrating. But
See,
you can't have everything.
at least you have an excuse, right? You have
And I'm still alive. Friday I lost a second brother.
Aw.
Like all the rest of my siblings, they're all younger than me, and
Yeah.
I've lost two of them now already. But 5 more.
Well, and I was going to say, you have the excuse of cognitive impairment. When I forget something, I have to be like, I'm getting old. That's it.
Yeah.
All I got.
Well, forgetting things is part of aging, but and you can forget things as a part of aging and not have cognitive impairment. Cognitive impairment is basically a further stage that a lot of people will never ever get to. But I've been battling it for 21 years, and I've been doing pretty good at it. But
I was say, gonna say, man, you come up with the answers here all the time. You
Mhm.
still come up
Well,
with great information,
but
and
the thing is, I'll start talking about something and then I go off track because my mind can't keep me sitting on that track.
well, Ray, welcome to ADHD. And
I was
somebody
gonna say,
with
I don't always stay on track either.
and I'm not trying to excuse it or say it's not a serious thing. I'm just saying we all know what you're saying. We understand. So guys, for tonight, and I see Sophie, hello. For tonight, we were going to talk about, we thought we might have a guest and we haven't seen her yet. So we're not going to talk about anybody in particular. We're going to talk generally about and I hate the fact, I do want to say before we dive into this, that if you have any questions, again, we're going to have Sophie in to have a newcomers, kind of question answer kind of episode, because keeping seahorses is really easy. Holly would say labor intensive, does depend on if you're trying to keep fry or dwarves or the larger species. But like with my larger species, they're so simple. There's nothing to it. Once you get set up properly and once you get everything fine tuned to where you know that you're not letting organics build up and the seahorses are eating happily and hopefully giving you fry if you want fry, but if not, not. But I'm just saying it's the same as keeping an SPS tank. They have specific requirements, right? So when I kept my mixed reef, I had to make sure that I dosed and I did this and I did that to make sure that the SPS were fed and that the oh my gosh, I can't think of the word now. I'm you guys know I'm terrible with words. But the I keep wanting to say Artemia. The anemones, because I had, rose anemone, I had clams, I had everything. And you got to make sure everything's fed and everything, the perimeters are right for it. Same with seahorses. You don't have to worry so much about the perimeters, just keeping no ammonia, no nitrites, and then keeping it to where they're not stung or hurt and keeping bacteria levels low by keeping organics low. But
It all becomes routine.
it does. It does. And I am rambling. Sorry. Thank you, Holly, for cutting me off. I'm just saying that keeping a pair or a couple pair of seahorses is not difficult once you get into that routine and understand what they need. However, a lot of times people will jump in and maybe add other things, or, we're going to talk about what can cause problems, why they become problems, and then we're going to talk about food because that's another question. So we're going to talk about all that tonight and try to get it done under an hour because I have to work in the morning. But don't forget, we're always in the group for questions. And the other thing is that everybody does things differently, right? So what we're talking about is that with seahorses, often if you set things up properly in advance, then you don't have the problems down the road. Whereas it's harder once you have the problems down the road and you have all these fish in the tank, or you're feeding a certain way or whatever. And then we come in and we're like, well, if you do this, that, and the other, this will be better. And it's harder because if you just set up right, then you'd be in a better spot, if that makes sense. Again, no right way, just that we see so many people try to stuff things into a smaller tank and then have trouble, right? Or we see people try to feed certain foods and then have trouble. So that's what we're going to talk about. I'm done rambling.
Look, Sophie got her seahorses.
Got her
Yeah,
seahorse.
she's got Kellyitis. Thought was pregnant, but no fry. Anyway, I'd like to make a comment before starting.
Okay, go ahead.
Basically, I think the reason a lot of the problems develop is because with social media, people read about someone else doing a certain thing and maintaining a seahorse tank in a certain fashion, a certain stocking density, certain tank mates, whatever, all sorts of things on there. And so they feel that they can do it too. Unfortunately, there's a few things that come into play. A lot of times, those people talking about their tank and what they're doing with it don't come back on and tell you, oh, it hasn't worked now. I've lost them all.
Right.
Or they don't tell you that some seahorses manage to have a higher affinity for, or have a higher immunity to problems that do develop in tanks. And while maybe one person can set up a certain way here and be successful, all people, and probably not even most people, can do it in that manner. Um, so we end up with people trying to copycat someone that either has been successful doing it through no fault of their own, or hasn't posted that it was a failure, so that you can know about it. And so when you start up like that, um, you're basically ending up heading for a bit of a disaster most times, but not always, like I say. Um, and also, just because those of us that are more experienced recommend certain ways, we're not the be all and the end all. Somebody will try something and come up and maybe a couple of years down the road, we're going to be doing things that way. Um, so you have all those caveats sitting in there, but generally speaking, um, if you're starting out and or if you've already started out and haven't run into problems and haven't been into it too long, then do some more investigating on what's recommended by the majority of long-term keepers, because most of what those people are going to recommend are worth paying attention to. It doesn't mean that you can't do things maybe the way that you're doing, but maybe it'll make you a little bit more observant of your tank so you can catch things when they do go south on you.
So I'm gonna say right now, Sophie, I'm thinking next week needs to be the Sophie episode, because you already have the seahorses. So I would love, if you're available next Wednesday, if you message me. I know we've already messaged, but if you message me and tell me that it's cool, and maybe message me some pictures of maybe you, or if not, then just the tank or whatever. And then I can advertise that you would come, and then we can talk about your setup, your seahorses, all of it. It would be amazing, because that new person setting up is the key to everything, I think, with seahorses. So let me know if you're available and if you want to, but I'm so happy that you have the seahorses. That's amazing. And so again, like I said, what we want to do is advertise, not advertise, but, tell people that seahorses can be kept very easily in a tank. It might be labor intensive, but it's not different than keeping a saltwater aquarium or a reef aquarium. But oftentimes we get these group posts that we want to investigate and help with. And so we end up talking about negative stuff. But that's few and far between, right? So when we have these episodes where we talk about why does what's in the tank matter? Why does the tank size matter? Why does what you feed matter? We're trying to help someone, not ever trying to say you can't easily keep seahorses if you set it properly. With that being said, let's
Let's just support class.
So why would you guys say that we give the advice? And I have my own answers, of course, but I always ask my friends here first. Why would you say that it's so important to give seahorses the water volume that we give them? Meaning the recommendation is at least 30 gallons per pair. And then, 30 gallons per pair is the new recommendation, period.
Yeah.
So why couldn't you put 4 seahorses in a 30-gallon tank with other fish. Why?
Well,
They're
you
prone
can
to bacterial
know what
infections,
you're doing.
is what I would say.
All right, I'm going to go to Holly first. Holly first.
Well, they're prone to bacterial infections, which one of the things we know that causes that is high organics in their water. So the more living creatures you have in a small space with their food and all that entails gives you higher chances of having organics in the water that are too high, causing bacterial problems with your seahorses. It's just one of their sensitivities that some other fish don't have, so we don't think about it, and you can't measure for it. So you have to assume, you know, based on water volume, the more water volume you have for each fish, the less organics you're going to have. Is how I think about it.
I like that. Go ahead, Ray.
You can keep them in that size of tank under those with those numbers that you're talking about, but the odds are you're not going to succeed long term. If you know the hobby and know the needs, then you will know the extra things you have to do to be able to succeed in that. Most people that get into this hobby, though, do not have the experience to be able to know how to keep them under those circumstances.
I don't mean to interrupt you, but let's not talk in general terms. Let's talk in specific. So you're saying that if someone has kept a reef tank, they think, okay, a weekly water change is good enough. Whereas when you keep seahorses, especially in a smaller tank of seahorses, if you're going to keep that many seahorses in a smaller tank, you better have massive filtration, massive, macros or something taking stuff up, because if not, you're going to have to do massive water changes constantly to keep the organics down. Is that correct? Is that
Basically, and it's a case of without the experience, you can't even conceive of the amount of work, the amount of filtration, the frequency, and the volumes that you're going to need for water changes. Like without that experience behind you, you're just not going to be able to do it. So the only way you're going to succeed is if you are one of the very, very few that have seahorses with a high tolerance for the problems that seahorses normally have. And there's not many people that have that. And then
or you're someone who listens to this type of advice, and even though you don't have the experience, I need to have massive filtration. So I'm going to get this huge skimmer. I'm going to get this K1 media. I'm going to overdo the filtration, and then I'm going to do water changes to make sure that everything's okay. Right?
I don't know people of hobbyists that start out like that. How many have you come across that start out that way?
I mean, no one does. I started out. Listen, for you guys, as we dive into this discussion, I just want to be really transparent. I started out with 4 erectus, juveniles, of course, but 4 juvenile erectus in a 29-gallon tank with no sump. And I did have macros everywhere, and that helped me. But I instantly, within 8 months, found problems. All of a sudden, the macros were getting cyano, and I was getting dinos and whatever. And then I did end up losing a male seahorse because he got a bacterial infection. I believe he scraped his pouch on a rock, but it doesn't matter. In cleaner water, in a bigger tank, he may have survived. Right. Whereas in that enclosed space with nothing, and after I lost that male seahorse, I ended up adding a sump, adding an algae scrubber, ending up transferring him to a bigger tank. So Ray's absolutely right. Most people, even me, did not start out, with the best experience because we didn't know better. And I came from freshwater and reef tank. So there's no embarrassment in it.
Mhm.
We're just saying, if you're hearing this and you're listening to this, go ahead and go overboard. So you are the 1% that actually does set up right. Because I sure didn't. Go ahead, Ray.
Well, one of the reasons I like to make that statement, well, you can, but with the caveats, is because if you tell them you've got to do it this way or you're not going to succeed, and they're sitting there reading about somebody else that did
Yeah.
succeed in doing it, then they don't want to listen to you anymore.
Mm-hmm.
So if we start off by explaining that you can do it, but it's going to take a lot of knowledge and it'll take some luck, but and then try to explain that it's better to start off with the basic recommendations that we know give the best chances of success. Start off that way first until you get a lot of experience under your belt, where you can decide to make other moves in the tank, add other things if you wish, and just do it slowly, so that if you make this one move and you end up with problems, and that's that one particular thing usually that you'll have to reverse it so you can be back successful again.
But so for the original, um, why does the size of the tank matter? You're basically saying that it's because
Makes everything more forgiving, as
giving.
Holly was saying.
Yes, great.
And
Okay.
it's not that conditions won't get bad in a tank with more volume.
Right.
It's because it's just that it'll take longer before it gets there. For instance, the dissolved organics, which we now know lead to problems in the tank, and while we cannot measure them, they're still going to go up if we don't do things that are necessary to keep them at bay. And how do I say this? We have to always be cognizant of the conditions in the tank there and what our seahorses look like, what their habits are, so that if there is something that appears different, or if the habit of a particular seahorse is different, then we've got to sit there and pay attention to that and figure out what are we going to do different now to get things back where it was.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
Just having a larger tank volume is not the be all and the end all if you don't do other things to work along with it.
But Shyla also mentioned, like in an emergency situation, the larger tank volume has been a huge help for her when her tank was due for a water change for the longest time, but she was recovering from surgery. The inhabitants are okay because she had that leeway, that time.
Yeah.
With the smaller tank, it would be chaos. I totally agree. And thank you for that comment, Shyla. Bonnie, I did see your question about the cleanup crew. We will get to it, I promise you. But diving a bit deeper into the tank setup, why do you guys, well, actually, Holly has different tank inhabitants. So let's talk about why each of us decided yes or no to other tank inhabitants. And Holly, I'll let you go first because I think you started with the tank inhabitants, right?
I did. Originally, the reason why was because I wanted a lot of interesting creatures to look at. I mean, basically, I got into the saltwater hobby with seahorses. So, and there's a lot of interesting saltwater fish. So, I wanted to have a variety of things, to look at. So, that was the reason I started with tank inhabitants besides the seahorses. So I now have one tank that where most of the inhabitants are gone now, other than the seahorses, but I still do have a goby and a little hermit crab in there that are many years old, just like the seahorses are. So in the other tank, I did seahorses only. And the reason for that was because I learned through experience with the first tank with multiple inhabitants that it was easier for me to take care of a tank that was seahorses
Is that
only.
is that because the other inhabitants had other needs?
Hmm. You
Okay,
have to think about when you're doing a community tank like that, you have to pick out fish that basically have the same needs and can all get along. You know, they don't need different temperatures, they don't need different salinities or different this, different that. It helps if they eat the same things. It helps if they don't eat each other.
right.
I mean, there's a lot to think about when you're putting together a tank with multiple inhabitants. And it's easier, I found, for me to keep the seahorses only tank than it was for me to do the tank with multiple kinds of fish. And that has it, and that's not the same for everybody. It mostly has to do with my work life and things like that. So, I mean, somebody who might be at home all the time or has other people in the household to help with their hobby, it might be easier for them than it is for somebody like me that works all the time and was doing
Sure.
it alone.
And
So I'm
I
not saying it really is that way for everybody. It was just that way for me.
no, I love that you brought up the temperature though, because that was one of the things that people have asked me endlessly. Because most saltwater fish
Or tropical.
did for the tropical
Mhm.
higher temperatures, some of the macros and some of the corals are recommended.
Yeah.
They have to have those higher temperatures, and then here we are saying no, no, no. You want lower temperatures with
Yeah.
seahorse. So
I
it's
could not keep my coral happy, and I got easy kinds of coral, like the zinnias and, the stuff that everybody has to, like, trim all the time, and they wouldn't make it in my tank, and I have a feeling it was probably the temperature, because I
yep.
kept the temperature low for the seahorses, and those corals didn't like it.
So it really does depend on what you're trying to do, right? I can absolutely help you create a magical seahorse tank with multiple macros and some even softy corals and etc. But if you're looking like for an SPS tank, it's not going to jive with seahorses. It's just not. And certain fish just aren't going to jive with seahorses, not just because of the bacterial problem aspect, not just because they need different temperatures in feeds and that they're, like fast moving fish stress seahorses. But I'm just saying, if you want to keep seahorses, we can help you keep seahorses. But you're just better off with a tank that either is seahorse only or goes by the recommendations that have lasted forever about the slow moving fish that won't and this the coral that won't sting them and doesn't need higher
Mhm.
temperatures. Ray, what's your 2 cents on this?
Well, I went at things a different way because a few decades ago when I started, uh, I didn't put conventional reef fish in with my seahorses. What I tried to do was put pipefish in with them.
Ooh,
And this was when I first started, and I didn't know the susceptibility of seahorses to pathogens that they haven't grown up with. And it turns out that you can get lucky and things may work out. But like me, I wasn't lucky and things didn't work out. Seahorses don't do well with pathogens that they haven't grown up with. So when you introduce, say, even another seahorse from another breeder, that seahorse could introduce that pathogen they haven't grown up with. Now, if in my case, by introducing these pipefish, which were wild caught, I most certainly was introducing pathogens that they hadn't grown up with.
so
If I
so real quick, break that down for anybody like me that doesn't. understand the chemistry and all that. Basically, to put it simply, I'm not going to try to explain it. I'm just going to tell you the rule. Basically, signathids, the diseases that can pass between signathids are easier to pass than a disease from another fish.
Mhm.
So if you put a seahorse in a tank with a captive bred seahorse in a tank with a wild caught pipefish, that pipefish is going to bring in pathogens that can attack the seahorse that maybe a different fish wouldn't. So mixing signathids together in a tank, I'm probably making it more confusing. I'm sorry, guys. But basically, the bottom line is don't mix wild caught with captive bred, is the bottom line. Go ahead, Ray.
And well, it turns it's not just that, but by introducing other marine fish, again, it's a hit and miss. You can some people get lucky and some don't. So I'm not saying you can't do it because obviously a lot of people have, but
Well,
a lot more
they
people have failed than succeeded
now,
in doing so.
absolutely, and now they have captive bred pipefish. So, but go on.
Yeah.
Sorry.
And well, with the captive breeding situation, it's far better if you can get your seahorses and captive bred whatever from the same breeding source.
Sure.
You're far less likely then to be passing on any pathogens that they haven't grown up with. Not impossible, again, but your odds are better. But anyway, I just looked at that early year that when I first got into it and decided it wasn't worth it to me to risk losing the seahorse in perpetuating my attempt. I may have ended up and got lucky and got a situation where things would work out, but I just figured it was safer not to do it. I stood a better chance of succeeding long term in staying away from that. And it ended up basically, I just stayed that way for my 21 years in the hobby. One other thing I'd like to get at, there was a question about cleanup crew.
Okay, wait, let me put up a question then, because I wasn't going to go there yet, but we're going to go there then. So Bonnie said, should you have a cleanup crew in a tank? Go ahead.
Okay. Um, Obviously, you can have a cleanup crew in a tank because many people do. I personally have never had a cleanup crew of any kind in any of my systems, that seahorse systems, that is. And the reason I chose that is I'm basically a lazy person, and I didn't want to get myself in the mindset expecting the cleanup crew to do what I thought it should be doing when I had enough experience to know that they don't always do everything that you want to, and I didn't want to get into the habit of depending on them. So I never ever depended on them. I depended on me to do what was needed, and just had to make sure that I fought through the lazy streak to do the things whether I liked it or not, do it when it needs, whether I like it or not, and just stay in that mode. Um, so you don't need a cleanup crew, but you can also have a cleanup crew. You can go both ways, but it's just my personal thoughts on it. And there has to be other people like me. Don't depend on the cleanup crew. The secondary aspect of it, people have to understand that the cleanup crew is cleaning up after your seahorse's mess. Seahorses are very messy in that they are selective in their eating habits. And on top of that, they create feces, which are nutrient laden because they don't have a digestive tract that functions like, say, ours does. So a lot of nutrient passes through out into the water columns via the feces that they produce. When your cleanup crew tackles that, a lot of people think, well, that's removing it from the system. Well, unfortunately, they will use some of that nutrient, but again, they pass out their feces in whatever form they have, depending on what form of life or what life form is part of your cleanup crew. And they again are passing out nutrient-laden feces, which again are fed on by the more microscopic life. The more microscopic life too still has their own waste production. So it's not totally removing things from the system.
Because it's
If you remove that system from yourself or by yourself, for instance, it's important to me, anything that traps the crap in the
crap.
filter, well, I'm talking uneaten food
I like that.
uh,
Trap the crap.
Traps
and the detritus, anything that traps that stuff should be cleaned out at the very least twice a week. If you don't clean it out, that crap, like the feces, uneaten food, it is decaying while it's in your filter or whatever you have there, and especially canister filters. But it's decaying all the time. And while it's decaying, it's producing those dissolved organics
Yeah.
that are going to build up and be a problem in your tank. And you cannot test for it. All you can do is be proactive about looking after it and trying to maintain it at a lower rate. So for me, I just didn't want to get to that into that lazy stage, and especially knowing that through my experience over decades in just salt water, I know that they don't just remove that from the system, just the same as if you were going to remove it yourself by
Right.
siphoning out and also by cleaning out a minimum of twice a week any of this filter material in there.
Sure.
So,
And having an algae scrubber where you remove the algae and it's actually removing. It's a great example because many people think that using algae is just you put it in and it's good. No, you have to harvest or it's not working.
you know,
I would say though that I like cleanup crew.
I do too. I just prefer you don't call them a cleanup crew. Don't think of them as a cleanup crew. Just think of them as other aquatic pets.
Maybe
Because really that's what they are. Yeah, they do eat stuff, like Ray was saying, but they don't really do the job of keeping the tank cleaner, if you ask me. They're another pet in the tank and I love them. I have a little crab I've had for years, and I love him. And I have a goby, and the goby, was almost considered part of a cleanup crew as he was sold, right? Because that's what they do. But no, he doesn't. He likes to be fed like the seahorses.
right.
And my little crab, he's not necessarily keeping my tank clean. Yes, he's going around eating stuff, but he's not. They're not like maids, they're
I
creatures.
will say that I'm right in between Holly and Ray, meaning that I love my cleanup crew, but I do use them as a cleanup crew. But the key is I make sure that there's, the adequate number of snails per gallon and all that stuff because I want them to clean the glass for me. I still go back with the magic eraser, at least once a week on the glass because they're not perfect, right? So I'm not. So
Yeah, they walk where they want to go, not where you want them to go.
but my point is, they will keep my glass clean, right? And
no, they will
but
keep street.
time out. Let me finish. What I was going to say is they will keep the glass looking clean, but I still feel like it's not clean enough, and I still have to wipe it at least once or twice a week, and I still feel like it's still my job to get the nutrients out. I'm not counting on them for when I say cleanup crew, I merely mean snails because I don't do anything but snails, and I'm just looking at them as pets, as Holly said, but also expecting them to make it look better in between my cleanings, but not expecting to do less cleanings because of them, if that makes
Mhm.
sense. Go ahead, Ray.
I never ever had snails keep my marine tanks, keeping the glass on my marine tanks clear. I could see once the algae started building up even a little bit, I could see the streaks where they're feeding,
Where they walked.
but I could see all the spaces where they didn't.
Yeah.
Mhm. Yeah.
And, there's no way if you want clean glass, you have to do something to clean it. Your snails are not going to keep that glass clean.
Well,
And it's
in my,
That's
I,
how it
I,
is in my freshwater tank. It's all splotchy because they go where they want to go, right?
so it's just whatever you can accept.
but I beg to differ, because if you have a seahorse only tank and you have macros
Mhm.
and then you have a cleanup crew, I clean the glass just because I know I need to, but it's all, I don't have, I mean, there's times I'll take a video or a picture where it's foggy because there's little, I can't remember the name for them. They're not copepods. They're the smaller species. What is the smaller species? Not cope. They're the little buggies on the glass, and you'll see those, and you'll see a little smear here and there. But they keep my glass clean.
You'll see a bacterial smear as well if the algae isn't taking over for it.
Okay. Well, all I'm saying is I would absolutely agree with both of them. Don't count on a cleanup crew to clean up your tank.
Yeah,
That's
there's
a
nothing wrong with having it. Just
yeah,
don't expect
Yeah.
them to keep you from
Do
having
the job.
problems.
Yeah.
right, right. Um,
I like Holly's idea. Don't call them cleanup crew.
yeah.
Yeah. They're
Call me
they're
with it.
aquatic pets to me.
So since we went to questions before we dive into more, Zen Ginger wanted to know: are there seahorse species that can actually handle occasional water temps?
Mhm.
Are Erectus the most durable, on the off chance that there was an issue and they had to deal with it for a day or two? Who wants
It's
to?
not really the temperature, I'll
Okay.
say, for them that's caused the problem. It's the bacteria growth in the water from the temperature being higher.
And the
So,
parasite.
yeah. So it's the seahorse itself can handle warmer temperatures. I mean, they live in warmer temperatures, down in Florida and the Gulf.
It's
Yeah.
just a big gulf instead of a tank.
Yes, exactly. It's the bacterial growth in warmer water that causes the problem with them. So if you only have, I mean, I've had issues with tanks being like up to 80 degrees for a brief period. When I was raising fry, I didn't have a way to keep the water temperatures down really. So they were raised in water that was close to 80 degrees. But the key was I changed the water all the time. It was keeping it really clean for them was the important part.
Ray, what's your thoughts?
On you have to kick me back into mode again.
Oh, on the warmer temps,
Oh,
like how seahorses
yeah.
handle warmer
Seahorses,
temps.
seahorses most definitely can handle warmer temperatures, but the reason they can handle it in the wild is because they're not in a box. The water is always changing there. The density of the bacteria and the parasites that are around them there can't build up like they do in an aquarium. In an aquarium, they keep on producing and they have nowhere to go. You have to physically remove them in some manner or so on. And because we can't always be removing them, we try to restrict the rate of growth that they can go through. And we've found over the years that by restricting the growth to a maximum 74 degrees Fahrenheit, then that was sort of a point where we could live with it. If you kept them at 75, the curve was starting to go up, and it wasn't a straight line curve, the increase in growth of these things. It was an exponential curve, so that the higher the temperature, the actual growth rate. If, how do I say it? If your slope, you went up, say twice the distance on the slope, you didn't get just twice the rate of growth. It was an exponential growth that was many multiples of it. And the higher the temperature, the more many multiples continue up there. It wasn't a straight line growth or straight line change. I don't know how to put it into words here right now. Usually I have a better chance of explaining it, but today's not a good point for me.
I think you did a good job. I understood what you said completely.
A lot of people don't understand exponential.
Mm-hmm.
They don't know
Well,
the difference between straight line and exponential.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, but basically you're saying that after 74 degrees, when it hit 75 degrees, all of a sudden the bacteria grew a
It
lot.
explodes.
Yeah.
The bacterial growth, it becomes a lot very quickly the higher the temperature is.
And then it's, the seahorse possibly can't handle it. The higher the temperature gets, the faster the bacteria grows. And then, the seahorse has problems, which in my case, sorry, let me turn my camera back on here. Sorry, guys. In my case, that's what happened is I came home one day and my air conditioning had cut off because I don't have chillers or heaters. I just use my air conditioning and my central air, whatever. And it had died in the middle of the day. And I came home and the tank went from 72, 73 to 82, like in half a day. Right. And that's the key too, is it's a gradual increase and decrease, right? When you do anything quickly, that's bad. Because think about it. If the temp goes from 74 to 75 and all of a sudden bacteria explodes and starts growing rapidly, then that's really bad. If you go up to 82, oh my God, right? And so, I did everything wrong. I lowered the temperatures too quickly. I didn't do it slowly and whatever. And I got problems. And I was able to medicate them and put them in a hospital tank and use medication to heal them. But had I not depended on central air, first of all, had I lowered the temperature gradually, had I done more frequent water changes, knowing that there's more bacteria in the water, like that's one thing that I think I really made a mistake on is I did a massive water change when I first realized what had happened, but then I didn't do massive water changes after that, right? I thought, okay, I did this massive water change. I don't have to keep doing it. And I think I could have handled it differently is my only point. Go, Ray.
And while we're on this temperature kick, it's also the way that this all works with the exponential factor there. It's also the reason why when we put seahorses in a hospital tank for treating them, it's best if we can lower that temperature slowly down to 68 degrees or 20 degrees centigrade, because at that temperature, it's even a slower rate for the pathogens and the bacteria to grow. And when you're trying to treat them, you're either doing a lot of water changes, trying to just get them to heal naturally, or you're treating them with an antibacterial agent or an antiparasitic situation. But you don't want them, the expansion of whatever you're treating, you don't want that expansion to occur any faster rate than what you can possibly allow. So by getting the temperature down to that 68 limit, you're going to help whatever, either the water changes to allow for natural healing, or you're going to allow for the antibacterial to work better on the bacteria that can't grow as fast.
So, what is your recommendation, Ray? If someone has a seahorse that they believe has a bacterial infection, what do you suggest?
Well, I'm a great believer. When in doubt, take it out. And if
Okay.
you think even if you don't know 100% for sure, if you're leaning towards the thoughts that it's a bacterial infection, put it in a hospital tank. 10-gallon usually works fine, and especially for those that have access to meds, because most of the protocols for the meds are based on 10-gallon tanks. You put them in there with new water, with open-ended air lines for water circulation and for aeration. Don't use air stones. Air stones don't move the water quite as well, but on top of that, you end up with too much salt creep. Have artificial hitches. Um, oh, I'm losing my train of thought here. Oh,
So,
and lower the temperature down to 68 slowly. And the
mhm.
other thing I like to recommend, a lot of times when you're going to put them in the hospital tank, they've been having eating problems as well. So count every piece of food that you put into that tank, and then when you remove the food that's left over, you know for sure whether or not they are actually eating some of that food. If
Good, good.
if you're taking out the same amount of food that you put in, you know you've got more severe problems, and you may end up having to feed manually.
Holly, what's your thoughts and disagreements on that conversation?
I do, I don't really have any disagreements. I don't use an open-ended airline usually, because if I do, I have to clip it to keep it from falling out. So, because there's nothing to weigh it down. So what I found, they sell like at Petco and probably other places, they have these bubbler things that make big bubbles like an open-ended airline, but it's like an aquarium decoration, so it's weighted, so it'll stay down better. So I like those. I usually, honestly, when I've had seahorses in the hospital tank, a lot of times I don't feed them at all while they're in there. Usually it's because they went into it not eating. That's
Mm,
the reason they ended up in the hospital tank. So to keep from getting like more pollutants, I guess, in that tank, I'll give them a day or two, with no food and their medication, and then try to feed them to see if they'll eat, just to have less cleanup.
so I would say we're talking about two the same but different things. So I have absolutely taken a seahorse with a bacterial infection, put him in a separate tank,
Mhm.
not medicated, just did massive water changes, fed him. He didn't eat at first, but then he started, and it worked out because I was doing these massive water changes to make sure there was no bacteria in the tank. I've
Mhm.
also taken seahorses from the time that I was discussing where
Mhm.
the temp spiked, they got a bacterial infection. I put
Mhm.
all three of the seahorses that were in the tank into a hospital tank, and I did treat them with medication. And I don't think I fed for the first day because one of the medications said it will curb their appetite. So I waited a
Yeah,
day and then fed them.
part of it.
Obviously, it depends on if your seahorse is to the point where it's not eating or whatnot. And then there's other recommendations like live foods and etc. But I think the difference is between medication and fresh water. And I think both can work. Like
Mhm.
both have worked for me. It just depends on the exact circumstances, and which sucks because we can't make a this is how you handle this, right? Because it depends on the circumstances.
Yeah, it
And
depends kind of on what you think is wrong with the seahorse. I think in my case, it was pretty much always a bacterial infection. If a seahorse was going in the hospital, I don't think I ever put a seahorse in the hospital for any other reason, honestly.
In my case, I don't have a choice. In Canada, like Australia, we can no longer get antibiotics for our exotic pets.
Yeah.
It's
Which
coming in the US too.
I know it is, but so therefore, if you have a problem right now, get your antibiotics.
Line them up.
I would recommend kanamycin, triple sulfa. I don't think you can get Furon 2 anymore, but what's the other one, Holly? Nitrofurazane?
It's nitrofurazone. Is that it? I get it mixed up. Yeah, it's the generic of it, basically. It's what it actually is.
So get it now, is what I'm saying.
Furan 2 is just the brand.
Right. So again, the ones I just named, Canaplex is great too because it treats both gram negative and gram positive. And for different things, you use different things. But back to Zen's original question, do you think that certain species can handle that fluctuation in temperature better because of their genetics, because they came from areas where it fluctuates a lot? Meaning, like,
Well, obviously there are differences in erectus and reedi, and when you compare them to the abdominalis won't live long at the same elevated temperatures that erectus will.
right.
Now, I don't know if anybody has ever actually tried, say, on a long-term basis over a couple of years, trying to get them from that maximum 68 and tried to gradually acclimatize them to a higher temperature. I don't know if that's been tried, but I haven't seen anything about it, so I can't say it's an absolute.
But I do feel like out of all the seahorse species I've kept, erectus are just hardier. Like, I don't know if it's just because I bought good specimen. Like, again, that's the problem. Every individual is individual. I can't say it's because I bought great specimens from captive breeders or, from friends or whatever.
They
But
seem to be pretty
yeah.
hard. Like for me, in the years that I've had seahorses, the only real problems I think I've had with them were bacterial related and ciliates
Hmm.
are really the only two. They've had. I mean, stuff has happened. There's been emergencies. There's been seahorses, um, baby seahorses dropped on the floor and not noticed for several minutes that made it through just fine. There's been temperature fluctuations, probably some salinity fluctuations. I've had a tank burst and lost all the water. Popped the seahorses in buckets and other tanks, and
They thrived.
they did fine. The only things I found they're really sensitive to is, like I said, the bacterial issues and the ciliates. I've had to battle
So
ciliates.
I guess the end of that story is basically, if you're setting up for seahorses, just go overboard on filtration.
Mhm.
Like, go
Mhm.
overboard. It's not going to hurt anything.
Won't hurt. Yeah, it won't hurt.
It will only help. And then, don't take advantage of the fact that the tank looks great. Assume there's still stuff in the water. I
Yeah,
need
because
to
you
see
can't
water.
see it.
Yes. So let's dive real quick, guys, because I said we were going to make this an hour and we're already at an hour and a half. We love
And
to
no,
talk.
I don't have Thanksgiving decorations for the seahorses.
Why not?
People are asking because they don't make them. I guess I haven't seen anything.
Oh, see.
I don't know. I haven't been in Petco lately, but usually they have Christmas out before Halloween's even over. So
All right, I'm going to have to read these questions because I was missing it while we talk about the next topic. So real quick, let's talk about foods because we had a question about someone told someone that basically if they were worried about their seahorses having bacterial problems, it would be better to feed them live or frozen brine versus myces, right? Ray? Or tell me what the question was.
Well, I guess somewhere somebody has posted something about frozen myces being bacteria carriers. And so how do I say it? There isn't any documentation anywhere that I've ever seen that shows that myces have any higher chance of carrying bacteria than, say, frozen krill or frozen brine or any other frozen product. Anything you put in the tank has a chance of adding bacteria to it, but some things are more than others. For instance, adding live food that hasn't been properly treated with
Peroxide.
your peroxide, then you're going to have a higher chance of introducing something there. But if you're going to feed properly with frozen food, if you thaw it and give it a quick rinse and feed it right away to the tank, there's little chance that you're going to have introduced any problematic bacteria at that time. However, if you thaw it and rinse it and say you feed some now and you stick some in the fridge and you're going to use the rest, say tonight or maybe the next day or something, then you are going to have a possibility of introducing a much higher bacteria load because it's had time to grow. Even in under fridge conditions, bacteria still can grow. So any frozen food stands less chance than any added live food, except for if you are able to treat the live food with the peroxide before you put it in. Now, if you're cultivating, say, amphipods in some part of your system that is connected to the tank, and they're growing that way, and the seahorses can feed naturally off of them as they pass through into the seahorse tank itself, then the likelihood of them being problematic for any bacterial infection is extremely low. They're only going to have the bacteria that are that the seahorses are already exposed to, and if it was going to be a problem to them feeding off of an amphipod that has the same bacteria in it already, I can't see any possibility of it being a problem.
Well, and bottom line is there will never be a time where frozen brine shrimp is better than frozen mysis, right? Like,
well,
It
it's
doesn't
not
have
it's
the
not
right
for, it's
nutrients,
not for
right?
bacteria reasons though. It's for nutrient reasons. Brine shrimp, contrary to what many people are trained to believe, do have good nutrient profile for
right,
protein. They
right.
have they have excellent proteins, but they don't have a fatty acid profile. And while mysis don't have an ideal situation, it's not comparable to the live food that the seahorses are feeding on in the wild. They do have a much better fatty acid profile than what the brine shrimp do. With the brine shrimp, it's non-existent. With the mysis, most of them are freshwater mysis or brackish, but they still have some fatty acid profile.
So is that fatty acid what people think is leading to higher organics?
Well, the fatty acids it's not just the fatty acids. It's anything organic is going to increase it. You know, if you're adding it to your tank there, anything organic at all is going to increase those levels, unless it happens to be something that's not dissolvable. And there are organics that won't dissolve, or if they do dissolve, it's so minuscule that it's not going to have any effect.
But the advice someone to say, okay, if you think your seahorse has a bacterial infection, switch from frozen mysis to frozen brine makes absolutely no sense to me.
No, it doesn't happen that way, but it's unfortunate because in the advent of our social media now, if somebody has a bad experience and they come to believe that it was
Yeah.
due to this frozen mysis here, and they start posting it, there are many people that take it as gospel and they get that into their minds.
And also, sadly, it could be the truth. If they bought rancid, twice thawed and refrozen, thawed, refrozen, where that mysis had bacteria in the capsule or in the packets,
That
then
can happen with any frozen food.
truth. But I'm just
Not
saying, to try to tell someone else, hey, switch to brine shrimp instead of mysis, it doesn't make sense to me. Like, that doesn't even register on my, like, how would you think that?
right.
Well, maybe they didn't put two and two together, like you were saying. Maybe it happened to them, and they
Right.
didn't think, oh, maybe it was because the mysis was spoiled. They
Right.
thought, oh, it's because it's mysis. They
Right.
didn't. They didn't. It didn't click that the reason the mysis caused the problem was because it was spoiled.
Sure. And I
That's
get that.
what they
I'm
did.
not, attacking anybody. I'm just saying I don't, like, anybody who did any kind of research would
It's
know
not rational to me.
right,
It's to come to that conclusion.
that brine shrimp have to be enriched to provide seahorses what they need. It's a great snack. Live brine shrimp can be enriched and raise up, fry, and sure. But for our adult seahorses, they need that fatty acid that comes from the mysids. So just doesn't make sense to me. But Ray, did you have something else to say, or you good?
No. Basically, the reason is there are seahorses and other creatures that need DHA but are
Yep.
unable to produce it. Now,
Yep.
for instance, there are a lot of other creatures, and like humans, for instance, we can actually manufacture
Yep.
DHA out of EPA.
Yep.
And so, if we have a source of EPA and we get that in our foods, we can create our own DHA. And there's a lot of other creatures like that, including marine animals and marine fish. It just so happens that seahorses are ones that cannot do that. So
Yep.
they have to take
Those,
it in through their food.
So all those out there that are like me and lost him 5 minutes ago, bottom line is seahorses need DHA. They can't produce it themselves like the rest of us can. So we got to feed it to them. Bottom line, right? Did I
Yes.
cover it? All right, good. So Zen Ginger said her fear is always they've lost power for a few days during summer hurricanes. And while she's got a generator for filtration and air, can't control the temp without AC. Thoughts, guys?
There's some, well, I've done it before I had chillers. I had to, because as Kelly found out when she came to visit, our summers can get really hot and it'll be like 80s in my house. So
Yes.
before I had chillers, on really hot days, here comes the labor intensive part again. About I had to put frozen 2 liter water bottles in my sumps and run fans and ice packs, frozen water in Ziploc bags, different containers made into ice. And the thing about that is when your temperatures are really hot, it doesn't last long and it doesn't make that big of a difference in the temperature of your tank water, especially when you have a large tank. So basically, it can be done that way, but it is a pain in the butt. Um, I'm really thankful for my chillers because now they save me all that work in summer because I can't run AC in this house affordably to keep the aquariums to the temperature they need to be. So they each have their own chiller, and it's year round. I have it plugged in year round. I have the heaters plugged in year round. I don't take them down because where I live, we get huge temperature swings. I might need the heater and the chiller both in the same day to
Yeah.
keep my tank stable here. So if you can swing it, I do recommend a chiller. Otherwise, yeah, you can control the temperature using frozen water bottles, fans, basic stuff like that, but it's a pain in the butt. So,
Sure. And I would say again, just to keep in mind that gradual is what matters, right?
yeah.
So if your temperature is going to rise or is going to fall, it's making sure that it's gradual that matters.
Mhm.
So I don't know.
You can go down faster than you can go up.
Truth.
Generally my rule is I read somewhere it's a 4 degree either way. That's pretty much safe for them as far as when temperatures are changing, like when you do your water changes, that type of thing. You can go down in temp more than that, faster, not the up direction, but you can lower your water temperature by maybe 6 degrees. Maybe more. They can take it. Don't go raise it up very fast, but you can lower it faster than that. And I've used water changes in summer to help, cool the tank because the
Well,
water coming out.
that's her follow up. She said, and during citywide power outages, they tell
Hmm.
you to boil water. And I mean, I'm not sure water changes wouldn't be worse in that situation. Like if she had to boil
Well,
the water.
if you're making RODI water, though, you wouldn't have to boil it, would you?
Right. And I was going to say, one of the things I do is I always have distilled water. Um, you know,
I used to
bottles I
do
buy,
that before I had RODI. I did that too. I'd keep a
and
little
if you
distilled
have
water.
so much distilled water in a refrigerator or freezer or whatever, then it's there when you need it.
Hmm.
That's my thoughts. I would get
Nothing
it.
wrong with using boiled water to make salt water.
Okay. But
Hmm.
but I think she was talking about the temperature, Ray.
Well,
Well, if
obviously you're going to cool it down before you do it. But the thing is, uh, the elevated temperatures that you're dealing with in this situation here, you are increasing your pathogen counts. Now, changing the water, even if it may be the same temperature, you're at least getting rid of or lowering the bacteria and pathogens
pathogens.
that are
Mhm.
in that.
By boiling it. But
And
then,
that's how I did when I was raising my babies, because naturally I didn't have them on chillers and
right.
all this. They were just in tanks around my house. So their water would get pretty up there, pretty close to 80 degrees, but they were getting 100% water changes once or twice a day,
Yeah.
because they were only in maximum a 10-gallon tank.
Yeah.
So that's not a whole lot of water. And I couldn't see doing that in a huge tank.
Right.
But I think one of her points is too, if the power's out, it's kind of tough to boil water, maybe, depending
Yeah.
on what your source of being able to boil the water is.
Camp
Yeah.
stove,
But if you're running an RODI, you don't need power for that.
What'd you say, Ray?
they can use camp stoves or
Yeah,
they have. Oh, I can't think of the name. You can buy these little cans of fuel that you can light
I
and
have those.
do your
Yeah.
coffee on it, that kind of thing. Another thing I'd like to, before it goes out of my mind here,
Yeah.
Zen was talking about with the freshwater tank using ice on it. But with the saltwater tanks, what I normally do is I happen to have one of those vacuum packing things that you
Yeah.
can grow up veggies or meats or so on.
Mm-hmm.
If you when you get it, the sides are already made on it. So if you make a bottom on it and
Yeah.
then take it and fill it up with water and
Mhm.
don't seal it, and then prop it in the freezer so that it's not going to spill, let it
Mhm.
freeze, and then seal it.
Let's do it.
And then once you thaw it, it will flatten out and it'll be easier to handle. Like when you first freeze it, uh, it balloons out at the top. So you have to have a little bit of extra plastic of the bag there, a little bit extra there, so that you're able to put it in the sealer and seal it because of that width of the ice at the top. But then once it is actually sealed, you thaw it out, and then you can refreeze after that all the time, and it'll be flat, and you can throw it in your tanks and keep replacing a bunch of them like that.
Yeah.
And I didn't use new bags. I used the larger bags of things that I had already used the sealer for. Put something in, freeze it, and maybe months down the road, okay, now I eat it. And I make sure I cut close to where the seal is, and then use the product, wash it out, and I don't even have to worry about how well it's washed because it's not the inside isn't going to come in contact with the salt water anyway. So then you just make it out of a used bag and put in as much water as you can and still allow enough room to be able to seal it at the top.
And I used to buy the ice packs just that they sell at the store, like at Walmart or Rite Aid or whatever. I'd buy those packets you could freeze, and
I
I'd
had a
put
problem with
those
those.
inside of a Ziploc so that it won't leak out, because it's sealed in something else. And then I use those.
Bonnie
Yeah,
said you
pre-filled plastic ice cubes. Yeah. Take them and
Melt,
put them in a Ziploc so they don't, if something happens, they don't leak into your aquarium water. And
they melt
yeah.
too fast.
And
Anything
yeah.
too ice melts too fast. The
uh,
larger
Mhm.
the block is, then the
Yeah.
slower it will give off, and you won't have to replace it quite so fast.
That's why I always liked the 2-liter bottles. I'd take an old Coke bottle and
Yeah.
fill it with water and throw it in the freezer. I'd keep like about 4 of them. My deep freeze was half full with these Coke bottles full of water before I got the chiller.
I hate
Yeah,
Leanne.
like I said, you can do it, but it's a pain.
I hate Indiana, but I'm like, thank God I live in Indiana because I never
Mhm.
had to deal with any of this except for the one time that my central air went out. Like I just
Mhm.
never have had to deal with any of this. So I'm glad you guys can discuss it and come up with options for everybody because
Mhm.
yikes. But I would just say again, the gradual thing is the point, and being prepared, knowing where you live, knowing what you need to do in order to keep the seahorses safe. Oh, I'm so excited to see the new seahorses. Oh my gosh, Sophie, get in touch with me because I think you have to come on next week and tell us about the tank. That's
Yeah.
what I'm saying. But guys, I'm sorry to like cut it short, but I don't know if you can tell. I know I look a mess. I'm so tired. I want to talk to you guys all night, but I'm
I'm
so
with you on that.
like that.
I'm feeling the same
And I
way.
get up in the morning and I'm like, I want to keep talking. But for tonight, I think I am gonna call it. Ray, did we miss talking about anything that you wanted to talk about?
Well, in
You
my
wouldn't.
state right
All
now,
right.
I wouldn't remember.
Well, if we did.
Unfortunately, that's the way I have to live sometimes.
All right. Well, if we didn't cover anything that you had a question about, you can always comment on this video and we will come back to it. I always check the comments. And of course, we'll be here next week. We might have Sophie as a guest. We'll see. But if not, it'll be open chat again. So we're going to be open to anything we've seen in the groups or we, feel needs to be talked about or any questions you have. We're here for you guys, community. So forgive me for it, but we're going to go tonight. We will be back next week again. And if you have any comments, suggestions, I do read the comments. So comment or message me on the side. We can get some more people in here if you'd like. But for tonight, we're going to say Happy Wine Wednesday. Thank you guys all for coming.
Cheers.